Marcus King, once a tech mogul who graced magazine covers, now walked the streets unnoticed, his life seemingly reduced to nothing but a small bag of belongings and a weathered bench in the park. A gang of rowdy men spotted him, assuming he was just another homeless man to taunt. But what they didn't know was that this quiet stranger was no ordinary man. What happened next would leave them, and an entire city, speechless. The city was alive with its usual rhythm, car horns blaring, streetlights flickering, and hurried footsteps echoing against the pavement. The faint aroma of street food lingered in the crisp evening air, mingling with the faint buzz of distant conversation. Amid the hustle, one man sat quietly on a weathered park bench, seemingly invisible to the bustling crowd. His name was Marcus King, and he looked like any other homeless man. His jacket was patched in places, his shoes scuffed beyond repair, and his beard was an unruly testament to weeks without proper grooming. But his gray eyes carried a sense of calm and intelligence, contrasting sharply with his appearance. He held a tattered book in his hands, its pages yellowed with age. It was a rare moment of peace in a life marked by hardship. The bench he occupied was near a busy street corner, the kind of place people avoided lingering too long. Yet Marcus seemed unbothered, quietly turning the pages of his book as if the chaos of the city around him didn't exist. He wasn't there to beg or draw attention, just to sit and observe the world pass by. But peace is a fragile thing, and it wasn't long before trouble found him. At the corner of the park, a group of young men appeared, their laughter carrying an edge of malice. Kyle, the self-appointed leader, was a wiry man with a cocky swagger. He was flanked by Derek, Jason, and Troy, each as arrogant and brash as Kyle. They'd had a few too many beers and were itching for trouble. Spotting Marcus alone on the bench, they grinned at each other, a silent agreement passing between them. "Hey, look at this guy," Kyle said loudly, nudging Derek. "Sitting there like he owns the place. Bet he's got a whole fortune hidden under that ragged coat." The group chuckled as they approached, their movements deliberate and taunting. Marcus glanced up briefly, his calm eyes meeting Kyle's sneering face. Then he returned to his book, uninterested in engaging with their antics. "Oh, don't ignore us, old man," Derek called out, tossing an empty soda can at Marcus's feet. "We're just trying to make conversation." Marcus didn't flinch. He picked up the can and placed it beside the trash bin next to the bench, his movements slow and deliberate. Kyle stepped closer, his sneer deepening. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Or are you too good to talk to us?" Still, Marcus didn't respond. He turned another page of his book, his calm demeanor beginning to irritate the group. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Kyle's voice grew louder as he grabbed Marcus's book, yanking it out of his hands. He flipped through the pages mockingly, letting the corners tear as he did. "What's this? Some ancient guide to being a loser?" The others laughed, circling around Marcus. "Give that back," Marcus said softly, his voice steady but firm. It wasn't a plea, nor was it a threat. Jason chuckled. "Or what? You gonna hit us with your library card?" The tension escalated as Kyle tossed the book to Derek, who caught it and pretended to read aloud. "Dear Diary," Derek mocked in a falsetto voice, "today I was the saddest loser in all the land." The taunting was relentless, but Marcus remained composed. His silence only fueled their aggression, and soon they began rifling through his small pile of belongings, scattering them across the ground. "Man, this guy doesn't even have anything worth stealing," Troy said, kicking a worn backpack aside. "What a joke." Kyle's expression turned darker as he stepped closer to Marcus. "You think you're better than us, don't you? Sitting here all quiet like some saint. Well, you're not. You're just a nobody." Marcus stood slowly, his calm demeanor unshaken, despite the rising hostility. "Are you done?" he asked, his voice carrying a quiet authority that momentarily unsettled the group. Kyle sneered but hesitated. "You don't get to talk to me like that, old man." But before he could say more, the distant rumble of a car engine grew louder, followed by the sleek hum of a luxury vehicle pulling up nearby. "Marcus!" a sharp voice called out. Everyone turned to see a man stepping out of a polished black sedan, his tailored suit gleaming under the streetlights. Nathan, a clean-cut professional in his early 30s, strode toward the scene with purpose. His eyes locked on Marcus, then darted toward the gang. "What's going on here?" Nathan demanded, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The gang exchanged nervous glances, their bravado wavering for the first time. "Who's asking?" Kyle said, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Nathan ignored him, addressing Marcus instead. "Are you all right, Mr. King?" Kyle's face twisted in confusion. "Wait, Mr. King, what are you talking about?" Nathan didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his car and retrieved a leather briefcase, handing it to Marcus with a respectful nod. The gang stood frozen, their smug grins replaced by dawning uncertainty, and Marcus, still calm, finally broke his silence. "Let me introduce myself," he said, his voice as steady as ever. "Marcus King, former CEO of King Enterprises." The gang's expression shifted to outright shock. Marcus King's revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap. The gang, now frozen in disbelief, exchanged glances that shifted from confusion to panic. The homeless man they had mocked and tormented wasn't just anyone. He was a man of immense power and wealth, though his current appearance betrayed none of it. Nathan cleared his throat, the tension thick around them. "Mr. King, we need to leave soon. You've got a meeting in the morning." Kyle scoffed, trying to mask his unease with bravado. "Meeting? What kind of game is this? You expect us to believe this guy is some big shot?" Nathan's expression was one of disdain as he regarded Kyle. "Believe what you want, but Marcus King doesn't need to prove himself to you." Ignoring the gang, Marcus bent to pick up his scattered belongings, placing them carefully back into his worn bag. Nathan knelt to assist him, treating Marcus with a deference that made the gang's earlier treatment look even more shameful. Who are you, really?" Jason stammered, the fear in his voice undeniable now. Marcus straightened, slinging the bag over his shoulder. "I told you, Marcus King. I founded one of the largest tech companies in the world, spent decades building it from the ground up." Kyle laughed nervously, shaking his head. "Yeah, right. If you're so rich, what are you doing out here, dressed like that?" Marcus met his gaze, his eyes as calm and piercing as ever. "Sometimes you need to step away from everything to see the world for what it really is. People like you remind me why I made that decision." Nathan added, "Mr. King stepped down from his company to focus on philanthropic work. He's invested millions into projects that benefit the homeless, veterans, and other underserved communities. That's more than any of you have probably done in your entire lives." The gang fell silent, their earlier bravado crumbling under the weight of Marcus's words. The story of how Marcus King ended up on that bench began years earlier. Born into a working-class family, Marcus grew up with a sharp mind and an unyielding work ethic. His parents instilled in him the values of humility and resilience, teaching him to treat everyone with respect, no matter their station in life. He excelled in school, earning scholarships that led him to study engineering and computer science. By his early 20s, he was already a rising star in the tech world, developing innovations that caught the attention of major investors. King Enterprises was born in a cramped garage but grew into a billion-dollar empire. Marcus became a symbol of success, gracing magazine covers and rubbing shoulders with the elite. But as the years passed, he found himself increasingly disillusioned by the greed and excess surrounding him. Then came the turning point, a chance encounter with a homeless veteran who told Marcus a story that stuck with him. "I served my country," the man had said, "but when I came back, there was no place for me. They called me a hero, but they treat me like trash." That conversation stayed with Marcus, sparking a shift in his priorities. He realized that despite his wealth, he wasn't doing enough to make a real difference. So he stepped down from his company, appointing trusted leaders to run it in his absence, and began dedicating his life to philanthropy. Marcus didn't just write checks or make appearances at charity galas. He went undercover, immersing himself in the struggles of the people he sought to help. For months, he lived without the luxuries of his wealth, experiencing homelessness firsthand to better understand the challenges others faced. The park bench where the gang found him had become one of his favorite places to reflect. To them, he appeared to be a man down on his luck, but in reality, he was observing, learning, and finding ways to address systemic issues from the ground up. "You never know who you're dealing with," Marcus said, addressing the gang with quiet authority. "That's why you should treat everyone with respect. It costs you nothing, but it can mean everything." Kyle shifted uncomfortably, but his pride wouldn't let him admit defeat. "So what? You think you're better than us because you've got money?" Marcus shook his head. "Money doesn't make you better or worse. It's how you use it that defines you. The question is, what do you have, and what are you doing with it?" Nathan placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Sir, the car is ready. We should go." Marcus nodded, turning to leave, but not before offering the gang one final look, a mix of disappointment and hope. Marcus King's calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the gang's nervous energy as the weight of his identity began to dawn on them. For a moment, the tension hung heavy in the air, the group exchanging uneasy glances as they tried to reconcile the man they had mocked with the revelation Nathan had provided. Kyle, ever the loudest, tried to mask his unease with a scoff. "Yeah, right," he said, his voice tinged with false bravado. "You expect us to believe you're some big-shot billionaire? You're sitting on a bench in the middle of nowhere dressed like that." Marcus adjusted the strap of his worn bag, his calm gaze never wavering. "Believe what you want. It doesn't change who I am or what I've done." He paused, the weight of his next words carrying a gravity none of them expected. "The real question is, what have you done? What makes you proud of who you are?" The gang fell silent. For the first time, the dynamic shifted, the power they had assumed over Marcus slipping away. Nathan, still standing protectively by Marcus's side, took the moment to clarify. "Mr. King isn't here to prove anything to you, but for the record, he's not just a billionaire. He's one of the most respected men in this country, respected for what he's built and for the lives he's changed." Jason, who had been mostly quiet until now, looked from Nathan to Marcus with genuine confusion. "But if that's true, why would you be out here? Like, why would someone like you even care?" Marcus's expression softened, though his voice remained firm. "You don't understand because you've never tried. You've never stepped outside your little world to see the bigger picture. I'm here because I've made it my mission to understand what people go through, the people most of society ignores, the people you think are beneath you. You think it's funny to torment someone who looks like they're struggling, but have you ever wondered what got them there? What battles they've fought? Or are you too afraid to find out?" Kyle took a step back, his confidence faltering. "You're just trying to make us feel bad," he muttered, though the guilt was evident on his face. Marcus didn't respond to him directly. Instead, he turned to gather his scattered belongings, each item a small testament to his chosen life of simplicity. An old notebook, a reusable water bottle, and a photo of a woman holding a baby. He picked up the photo last, pausing as he stared at it for a moment longer than the rest. Nathan knelt to help him, his movements slow and deliberate, a quiet show of respect. The gang stood awkwardly, their earlier bravado now fully dissolved into an uneasy silence. "You want to know why I'm here?" Marcus said, standing to his full height. "Because this is what matters. Understanding people, fighting for them, doing more than just existing in my own comfort. What about you? What have you done today that matters?" Jason looked down, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, while Kyle avoided Marcus's eyes altogether. Only Sam, the youngest of the group, seemed to linger on Marcus's words, his brow furrowed in thought. "I used to think like you," Marcus continued, his voice quiet but firm. "I thought money and success were all that mattered. I spent years building an empire, making more money than I could ever spend. But it wasn't enough. It didn't mean anything when I met people who'd given everything for others. Veterans, single parents, people working 3 jobs just to survive. They're the ones who showed me what strength really looks like. That's why I'm here, to learn from them and to do whatever I can to help." Nathan checked his watch and gently interrupted. "Sir, the car is waiting. We should get going." Marcus nodded but turned back to the gang one last time. "Remember this moment? Not because of who I am, but because of what you've done. And next time you see someone you think is beneath you, ask yourself if you're willing to look closer or if you're too scared to see the truth." As Marcus walked toward the waiting car, the gang remained rooted in place, their earlier arrogance completely shattered. For the first time, they were forced to confront not just Marcus's identity, but their own actions and the people they had chosen to become. Kyle sneered as he snatched Marcus's worn-out book from his hands, holding it up like a prize. "What's a bum like you doing reading? You trying to be smart or something?" His voice dripped with derision as he waved the book in the air, eliciting chuckles from Jason and Derek. Marcus raised his eyes slowly, meeting Kyle's gaze with calm but unshaken resolve. "I'd appreciate it if you returned my book," Marcus said, his tone steady and devoid of fear. Kyle's smirk deepened as he pretended to flip through the pages, his mockery escalating. "Listen to him, guys. Appreciate it," he says. Real fancy words for someone who sleeps on park benches. Jason and Derek joined in, grabbing at Marcus's belongings. With an exaggerated sweep, Jason knocked over Marcus's small bag, spilling its contents onto the sidewalk. A few essential items, a toothbrush, a neatly folded jacket, and a small notebook, tumbled out. "Oops," Jason said, his grin widening as Derek nudged the scattered items with his foot, smearing dirt on the jacket. Passers-by glanced toward the scene but quickly turned away, their faces a mix of unease and helplessness. The gang's laughter grew louder, feeding off the lack of intervention. Without a word, Marcus knelt to gather his belongings, brushing off the dirt with slow, deliberate movements. His silence infuriated Kyle, who stepped closer, looming over him. "What's the matter? You think you're better than us?" he barked, his voice echoing in the suddenly tense atmosphere. Marcus stood, placing his items back into his bag with deliberate care. He remained silent, his measured movements a stark contrast to Kyle's escalating aggression. Jason nudged Kyle, grinning. "He's got no fight in him, man. Just walk away." Kyle ignored the comment, his irritation boiling over. With a sharp motion, he shoved Marcus backward, the force sending him stumbling, but not falling. "Stand up for yourself, old man," Kyle shouted, his voice tinged with frustration. Marcus straightened, brushing off his jacket, still refusing to retaliate. Kyle's anger reached its peak. "You're nothing. You hear me? Nothing," he spat. The tipping point came when Troy, the tallest and broadest of the group, stepped forward. "Enough of this," Troy growled, picking up a discarded bottle from the ground. With a loud crack, he smashed it against the bench, holding up the jagged edge menacingly. "Maybe we should teach him a real lesson." The laughter stopped. Jason and Derek exchanged uncertain glances, but they didn't step in. Troy moved closer to Marcus, his expression darkening. A small crowd began to form at a distance, their murmurs barely audible over the tension. Marcus's eyes flicked to the shattered bottle, then back to Troy's face. The moment stretched thin, charged with the weight of unspoken consequences. "Let it go, Troy," Jason mumbled, his voice faltering. But Troy didn't back down. "You think you can walk through here like you own the place?" he snarled, raising the bottle higher. The crowd seemed frozen, their collective breaths held as the scene teetered on the edge of violence. Marcus remained still, his calm presence a stark contrast to the chaos around him. Before Troy could take another step, a voice rang out from the crowd. "What the hell is wrong with you?" The voice came from a woman standing just beyond the growing circle of onlookers. Elena, a local teacher in her early 30s, had been watching the scene unfold from a nearby cafe. She stepped forward, phone raised and recording, her voice steady but firm. "Leave him alone. What kind of cowards gang up on one man?" Her words rippled through the crowd, emboldening a few others to murmur in agreement. Kyle turned toward her, sneering. "Mind your business, lady. This doesn't concern you." "Oh, it concerns everyone when you're threatening someone with a broken bottle," Elena shot back, keeping her phone trained on Troy. "You think no one will see this? The whole world is going to see what kind of people you are." Troy hesitated, lowering the bottle slightly as the weight of being recorded began to sink in. Kyle, however, wasn't ready to back down. "You think a video scares us?" he spat. "He's just a nobody. No one's going to care." At that, Marcus finally moved. He straightened his posture, his presence somehow commanding, despite his worn clothes and modest demeanor. His voice, calm but filled with authority, cut through the noise. "Do you really believe this is strength?" he asked, locking eyes with Kyle. "Do you think bullying someone weaker than you makes you powerful?" Kyle faltered, his bravado slipping for a moment before he scoffed. "You don't know anything about us." "You're right," Marcus replied. "I don't know you, but I know this. Real strength isn't found in fear or violence. It's in restraint. It's in building, not destroying." The gang fell silent, their energy dissipating as Marcus's words hung in the air. The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement. Just then, the sound of tires crunching on gravel drew everyone's attention. A sleek black car pulled up at the edge of the park. The driver, a sharply dressed man in his early 40s, stepped out, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. Nathan Carter, Marcus's former assistant, scanned the scene with a mixture of confusion and urgency. "Mr. King," Nathan called, striding toward the group with a leather briefcase in hand. The gang exchanged confused glances, their confidence wavering. Who's he talking to? Jason muttered. Nathan reached Marcus, his expression both apologetic and respectful. I'm so sorry I'm late, sir, he said, handing over the briefcase. There was traffic on the way to meet you. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder as people began to connect the dots. Marcus King. The name triggered recognition in a few bystanders. Wait a second, someone whispered. Isn't that the tech billionaire? The one who disappeared a few years ago? Nathan turned to the gang, his expression stern. Do you have any idea who you've been harassing? This man isn't just anyone. He's Marcus King, founder of King Innovations, the man who revolutionized clean energy and donated millions to community programs. The man who helped countless people, probably even some of your families. The gang's faces paled. Kyle's jaw tightened as he processed the revelation, while Jason and Derek exchanged panicked glances. We didn't know, Jason stammered. We didn't mean... Nathan cut him off. Ignorance doesn't excuse cruelty. You should be ashamed of yourselves. The crowd erupted into a mix of gasps and whispers. People began taking out their phones, snapping pictures and recording videos. Marcus remained calm, his expression unreadable as he took the briefcase from Nathan and placed it on the bench. Kyle stepped back, his confidence crumbling. We didn't know he was someone important, he muttered. Marcus turned to him, his gaze steady. It shouldn't matter who someone is. Their worth isn't determined by wealth or status. It's about how you treat them when you think they have nothing. The gang was speechless, their earlier bravado replaced by shame and uncertainty. Elena stepped closer, her phone still recording. I hope you all remember this, she said pointedly, addressing the gang, because the internet definitely will. Nathan placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. Let's get you out of here, sir, he said quietly. Marcus nodded but turned back to the gang. You still have a choice, he said, his voice carrying a quiet strength. This doesn't have to define you. What matters is what you do next. Kyle's shoulders slumped as Marcus's words hit home. I'm sorry, he mumbled, though his voice was barely audible. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he picked up his bag and turned to leave with Nathan, the crowd parting to let him pass. The onlookers began to applaud softly, their admiration for Marcus palpable. As the black car pulled away, Marcus glanced out the window at the stunned gang and the murmuring crowd. His life had changed in an instant, and now he would use this moment to inspire change in others. As the sleek black car disappeared down the street, a charged silence hung over the park. The weight of what had just unfolded settled in, leaving everyone stunned. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. Marcus King. I remember reading about him years ago. Didn't he disappear after his company's buyout? I can't believe that man was him. He looked so ordinary. Elena lowered her phone, glancing at the gang who stood frozen in place. Their earlier bravado had evaporated, leaving them looking small and exposed. Jason took a step back, his face pale. We didn't know, man, he muttered, looking to Kyle for reassurance. Kyle, who had led the taunts and mockery, stared at the ground, his fists clenched and unclenched as he tried to process the revelation. The image of Marcus calmly standing before them, unshaken even as they threatened him, replayed in his mind. For the first time, he felt the sting of shame. In the crowd, a man in his 50s spoke up. He's right, you know. It doesn't matter who someone is. What matters is how you treat them. His voice carried a tone of quiet authority, drawing nods from others nearby. A woman holding her daughter's hand added, What kind of example are we setting if we let people like this gang get away with it? Her eyes darted toward Kyle and his group, making them squirm under her gaze. The murmurs grew louder, and some bystanders began to approach the gang. What's your excuse now? An older man asked sharply. You thought he was just some homeless guy and that made it okay? Kyle finally looked up, his voice defensive but faltering. We didn't mean to... It wasn't supposed to... Wasn't supposed to what? Elena interrupted, her voice cutting through his excuse. Go viral? Ruin your lives? You think it's only wrong because he turned out to be someone important? The words hit harder than any of them expected. Derek looked down at the broken bottle Troy had discarded, then at the spilled contents of Marcus's bag. The realization of their cruelty sank in. I just, I didn't think it would go this far, Derek mumbled, rubbing the back of his neck. One of the bystanders, a young college student, stepped forward. You guys are lucky he didn't press charges right there. If it were up to me, you'd already be in cuffs. Jason glanced around nervously, noting the growing number of phones pointed their way. The gang's fear became palpable as they realized they were now the targets of scrutiny. Their behavior, their faces, everything was being captured. Meanwhile, Elena was still recording, her voice now steadier. This isn't just about Marcus King, she said, addressing both the gang and the crowd. It's about all the people who don't have someone to step in for them. People who get bullied, ignored, mistreated because someone assumes they don't matter. That has to stop. A smattering of applause followed her words, and a few people in the crowd murmured their agreement. The gang shifted uncomfortably, their earlier confidence completely gone. Despite the rising tension, Marcus's earlier words lingered. His calm demeanor, his refusal to retaliate, and his parting message about choices and actions left a lasting impression. Kyle swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. What do we do now, he asked, though it wasn't clear whether he was talking to his friends or himself. You start by changing, said the man who had spoken earlier, his tone firm but not unkind. And you hope that the rest of the world doesn't judge you as harshly as you judged him. The crowd began to disperse slowly, but the event left its mark. The story of Marcus King's encounter with the gang spread quickly, fueled by Elena's video and the buzz among onlookers. In the distance, Kyle and his group trudged away, their shoulders slumped. For the first time, they weren't running in triumph, but retreating in shame, the gravity of their actions weighing heavily on their minds. As the sun dipped below the city skyline that evening, Marcus sat in the corner booth of a modest diner. A steaming cup of coffee sat untouched before him, his thoughts replaying the confrontation from earlier. The disbelief in Kyle's face, the whispers of the crowd, and Nathan's unexpected arrival. All of it swirled in his mind like the steam rising from the cup. The diner's door jingled open, and Nathan stepped in, scanning the room until his eyes landed on Marcus. I wasn't sure you'd still be here, Nathan said, sliding into the seat across from him. I don't have much else to do these days, Marcus replied with a faint smile, gesturing toward the empty coffee cup. No mansion, no staff, just me in this booth. Nathan frowned. You've chosen solitude, Marcus, but it doesn't suit you. Today showed that you can't escape your legacy, no matter how hard you try. Marcus sighed, leaning back in his seat. I didn't want to escape it. I wanted to understand what life is like for people at the bottom, the ones who never get a break. But even now, people like Kyle remind me that you're judged before anyone knows your story. Nathan leaned forward, his tone urgent. That's why you can't keep hiding. Do you know what's happening to Wolf Industries? That empire he built after taking your company? It's crumbling, Marcus. Corruption, unpaid taxes, lawsuits. He's on the verge of collapse. Marcus raised an eyebrow. And you think I should swoop in and save it? Not save it, Nathan corrected. Reclaim it. You started that company to change lives. Wolf turned it into something unrecognizable. It's time to take back what's yours and use it for the purpose you intended. For a long moment, Marcus stared out the window at the city streets bustling with life. He had left the corporate world behind, seeking meaning beyond wealth. But what Nathan was proposing wasn't about reclaiming status. It was about restoring integrity. What would I even do with it? Marcus asked, his voice quieter now. Do what you've always done, Nathan said. Help people. Rebuild your influence and use it to lift others up. Today, those kids saw someone they thought was powerless stand tall. Imagine what the world could see if you came back. Marcus let the words sink in before nodding slowly. All right, Nathan, let's start with the shelters. Within weeks, Marcus's return became public knowledge. News outlets buzzed with headlines. Former tech mogul, Marcus King returns with a mission for change. His first move was acquiring several abandoned buildings in low-income neighborhoods, transforming them into state-of-the-art shelters. Each one offered not just beds and meals, but job training programs, mental health resources, and childcare. One shelter became a cornerstone of the community, where Kyle and his friends showed up unexpectedly. Marcus recognized them immediately as they walked in, their expressions a mix of guilt and determination. "What brings you here?" Marcus asked, his tone calm but firm. Kyle hesitated, then spoke. We, we wanted to help. Volunteering, I mean." Jason added quickly. "It's not just about making up for what we did. We want to do better." Marcus studied them for a moment before nodding. "If you're serious, there's plenty to do. But remember, this isn't about me forgiving you. It's about proving to yourself that you can change." The gang worked tirelessly, stacking supplies, painting walls, and cleaning rooms. Over time, Marcus saw a shift in them. Kyle, in particular, showed promise. When he admitted that he hadn't finished high school, Marcus personally connected him with resources to earn his diploma and later helped him enroll in a community college. As Marcus's initiatives expanded, so did his influence. He launched a foundation dedicated to addressing systemic poverty, focusing on education and community development. At one event, he delivered a speech that left the audience in awe. "We measure wealth in dollars and assets," he said, standing before a crowd of community leaders and media. "But true wealth is found in the lives we touch and the futures we help shape. My journey has shown me that you don't need millions to make a difference. You need compassion, resilience, and the courage to act." The audience erupted into applause. Among them stood Nathan, who couldn't hide the pride on his face. Back at the diner where it all began, Marcus returned to his corner booth one evening. The waitress, now familiar with his story, placed his coffee down with a smile. "You're making waves out there," she said warmly. Marcus simply smiled, gazing out at the bustling streets. He had reclaimed his power, not as a billionaire or a tech mogul, but as a man determined to uplift others. For Marcus King, redemption wasn't just about rebuilding, it was about creating a legacy of kindness. Kyle sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the flyer for Marcus's shelter. His room was small and cluttered, but it was his first step toward independence. The memory of that day at the park haunted him, the moment Marcus had looked him in the eye, not with anger or disdain, but with calm authority and compassion. It was a look Kyle couldn't shake. The same man they had mocked, shoved, and threatened had offered them a chance to change. He'd expected retaliation, maybe even jail time. Instead, Marcus had chosen a different path, and that choice weighed heavily on Kyle. A knock at his door startled him. It was Jason, holding a paint-stained shirt. "You going back to the shelter today?" Jason asked, a hint of hesitation in his voice. Kyle nodded. "Yeah, you?" Jason shrugged. "Feels weird, you know, showing up after everything we did. But Marcus didn't have to forgive us, and he did. Feels like I owe him." "You don't owe him," Kyle said after a moment. "You owe yourself. He's just giving us a shot to make things right." At the shelter, the gang worked tirelessly. What had started as a gesture to appease their guilt slowly turned into something deeper. Kyle found himself talking to the shelter's residents, hearing their stories of hardship and resilience. One man, a former teacher who had lost everything after a medical emergency, shared his journey with Kyle. "You're young," the man said one evening, while sorting donated clothes. "Don't let anger or pride ruin your life. You've got time to turn things around." Those words stuck with Kyle, and he began to see the shelter not just as a place for redemption, but as a lifeline. One evening, Marcus approached him while Kyle was repainting a wall. "You've been consistent," Marcus said, his tone neutral but encouraging. "Why?" Kyle set the brush down, wiping his hands on his jeans. "I don't know. At first it was guilt. Now, it feels like I'm building something, like I'm worth more than I thought." Marcus smiled faintly. "You are, but consistency is just the beginning. What's your plan?" Kyle hesitated. "I don't really have one." "Well," Marcus said, crossing his arms, "let's start with education. I've got connections at the local community college. They have programs for people who need a second chance. You're smart, Kyle. You just need to believe it." Over the next few months, Marcus became a mentor to Kyle. He helped him enroll in classes, encouraged him to apply for part-time jobs, and checked in regularly to ensure he stayed on track. Kyle's transformation wasn't instant, but it was steady. He started seeing himself as more than the product of a broken home or a troubled past. Jason and Derek followed suit, though their paths differed. Jason found work through the shelter's job placement program, and Derek reconnected with family he had estranged over the years. The group that had once terrorized Marcus now credited him with changing their lives. One day, Kyle stood at the podium of the shelter's annual fundraiser, nervous but determined. Marcus had asked him to share his story. "I used to think power meant being tough, being feared," Kyle began, his voice steady despite the room full of people. "But Marcus showed me that real power is in lifting people up, not tearing them down. I'm not proud of who I was, but I'm proud of who I'm becoming. And that's thanks to this place and him." The crowd erupted into applause, and Marcus, standing off to the side, nodded approvingly. It wasn't just about second chances. It was about proving that change was possible. For Kyle and the others, Marcus's shelter had become more than a place to rebuild. It was where their new lives began. The gang's transformation was far from perfect, but it was real, and it proved that even the darkest moments could lead to light when someone chose compassion over condemnation. Marcus stood at the edge of the bustling park, the very place where the defining moment of his new journey had unfolded months earlier. Now clean-shaven and dressed in a tailored navy suit, he looked every bit the man he used to be, but with a new purpose. The bench where he had been harassed by Kyle and his gang was still there, freshly repainted and surrounded by vibrant flowers planted by volunteers from his shelter. He sat down, resting his hands on his knees, and took a deep breath. The morning air was cool, the distant hum of the city blending with the laughter of children playing nearby. Life had moved on, but the lessons of that day lingered. A group of volunteers passed by, carrying supplies for a food drive Marcus had sponsored. They waved, and Marcus nodded back with a warm smile. Nearby, Kyle and Jason were unloading boxes of donated books for a community library initiative Marcus had started. Kyle caught Marcus's eye and gave him a thumbs up. Marcus returned the gesture, pride swelling in his chest. Later that afternoon, Marcus found himself standing in front of a crowd at a community event. A small ceremony had been organized to honor his contributions to the neighborhood. Leaders, residents, and even a few media outlets had gathered to celebrate the transformation sparked by Marcus's resilience and kindness. As he stepped onto the small stage, applause erupted. The mayor handed him a plaque inscribed with the words, "For turning struggle into strength and inspiring change." Marcus accepted it graciously and turned to address the crowd. "I'm humbled by this recognition," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "But this isn't about me. It's about what we can achieve when we choose compassion over prejudice, action over indifference. None of us are defined by the worst moments in our lives. Not me, not Kyle, not anyone." He paused, scanning the faces of those gathered. "I've learned that wealth isn't about what you have. It's about the impact you make. True wealth lies in what you give back, to your community, to your neighbors, and to the next generation." The crowd erupted into cheers, and Marcus stepped down, shaking hands and exchanging words of gratitude with the people who had come to honor him. That evening, as the sun set over the city, Marcus returned to the bench one last time. The vibrant colors of the evening sky painted the world in hues of gold and pink, a fitting backdrop for the quiet moment of reflection. He thought about the people he had met along the way, the lives he had touched, and the changes he had seen in himself and others. "True wealth," he whispered to himself, "isn't in what you own. It's in what you leave behind." With a calm smile, he rose from the bench and walked away, the plaque tucked under his arm and a renewed sense of purpose lighting his path.